In this season of Lent, we are spending time strengthening our relationship with God. We are walking with God, focusing on the spiritual disciplines that draw us closer, and perhaps trying some that we haven't experienced before. We are also talking with Jesus, pondering questions that we might ask him as we read through the lectionary gospel texts. As I imagine us walking with Jesus and our conversation with him, we may ponder the question, do you know us? This is what we want in life, right? To be known and loved for who we are. Well, we get the answer to that question in the story of the woman at the well. As our text begins, Jesus and his disciples were traveling from Judea to Galilee. And along the way, they stopped in a city, Sychar. Sychar was the location of Jacob's well. I read about the well this week. It's likely located in a ravine between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim at a fork in the road between Jerusalem and Samaria. It is about 100 feet deep, cut through rock, and then built with stonework closer to the top. One scholar describes the well as offering water that is clear and cool. He continues stating that people can visit the well and are still offered water from it, even today. Jesus sat by the well as a woman approached around noon, and they began to talk. What conversations do you have with strangers that you encounter? When you're at the grocery store or the gym, what do you say to the strangers that you meet? I thought about the conversations that I have at playgrounds. I spend a lot of time at playgrounds. And as the kids are running around and swinging from the monkey bars, the parents are off to the side, and we inevitably end up talking. Usually it's questions such as, how old is your child? Where do they go to school? Or comments like, well, there's never a dull moment in our house. I'm flying tomorrow to visit my sister, and so I thought about the conversations we have on airplanes. You find your seat, you say a polite hello to the person that might be sitting next to you. Perhaps you asked, well, where are you headed today? Before we put on our headphones and sit together in silence for hours. Our conversations with strangers tend to be fairly simple, fairly surface-level conversations. Well, that is until the person I'm sitting with asks me, so what do you do? That either begins a lengthy conversation or it makes it very brief. Jesus didn't speak to the woman at the well like he might a stranger. Jesus talked with the woman as he would a friend. He offered her living water. He revealed to her who he was. He spoke to her as someone who was important. This is surprising because the woman who approached him was a Samaritan. Now, when I say Samaritan, I'm guessing you think of the Good Samaritan. You know, the person who cared for the injured man along the road when the priest and the Levite both passed him by. But this is not the image that would come to mind for most people in Jesus' day. The Samaritans were despised. A Jewish person would not be seen interacting with a Samaritan. In fact, Jewish people would often go out of their way to avoid Samaria completely. Yet Jesus chose to travel through Samaria and interact with this Samaritan at the well. By doing this, Jesus was breaking down a cultural and religious barrier. Not only was she a Samaritan, but she was a woman. And men and women in Jesus' time did not interact with one another in public. In fact, when the disciples returned, they didn't ask Jesus why he was interacting with a Samaritan, which we might expect. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman. Jesus and the woman were at the well, and wells were known to be places of betrothal scenes in the Hebrew scriptures. It was at a well that Abraham's servant found Isaac's wife, Rebekah. It was at a well that Jacob met Rachel. It was at a well that Moses met his wife, Zipporah. Perhaps with these stories in the backs of their minds, the disciples knew that other people might take a second look at what was going on. Jesus went against all social constructs by having a conversation with a Samaritan woman. And their conversation was not just polite greetings between strangers, but more like one between friends. Now, if we're not already convinced that Jesus does know us, we can keep reading this text. Because after Jesus and the woman talked about the living water that Jesus can provide, he revealed that he knew her marital history. He knew her, and he accepted her, whatever her background was. He still offered her the living water. I wonder what drew Jesus to this particular woman. I assume that if he was traveling through the city, he could have had similar conversation with any of the people that he encountered. Now, noon was not the optimal time to gather water. It's the hottest point of the day, and so most of the women gathered there in the mornings or the late afternoon. This may indicate that the Samaritan woman was an outcast in her society. But even so, she may not have been the only person he encountered at the well. As I got to thinking about this, I wondered if perhaps he talked with her because he knew her, because he knew she would share her story with her neighbors. He knew she had the personality and the drive and the enthusiasm to tell the people about Jesus. As I studied this text, I learned that there is a celebration for this woman every year. The people of Oaxaca, Mexico, celebrate El Día de la Samaritana, the Day of the Samaritan Woman. On the fourth Friday of Lent, they set up booths beautifully decorated with palms and purple flowers. And at these booths, they offer water to people passing by. Now, the water they offer is different from the water at the well. The water these people offer is flavored with fruits and herbs. But the idea is similar. They offer water generously to all who walk by. They share the story with everyone, just as the woman did. Jesus not only had a conversation with the woman, but he shared a cup with her. He asked her to draw a drink of water for him from the well. The societal forces were working to drive Jesus and the woman apart. But because Jesus knew the woman, they could come together. They could have a conversation. They could share living water. What societal forces are driving us apart today? What is keeping you from having a conversation or sharing the living water with the people around you? In a world where we seem to be pushed further and further apart, what can we do to draw people together again? I think part of it is knowing one another. Jesus knew the woman, and that opened the channel for deep and meaningful conversation. We must get to know one another, just as Jesus knows us. And yes, Jesus knows us. He knows us just like he knew the Samaritan woman in the story. He knows the good and the not so good things about us. He doesn't care about our backgrounds or our upbringings. He loves us no matter what. Follow the example of the woman this week and share the good news of Jesus. But also get to know those around you a little better so that you can foster deep and meaningful conversations. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.